What's up, guys? Celestial Nor back. Finally got a little bit of sleep. Tonight, I'm making break-in stories for Night Stalker's channel. I'm reading them myself, so that's what we're going to have today until he gets back from his hiatus. I'm sorry if it sounds a little weird. Even on my channel, I'm reading another. I'm doing abduction stories. My ear is a little clogged. I don't know why I can't really hear much out of it, so I'm sorry if it sounds a little weird. I may be talking a little too loud. I don't know. So until he gets back, of course, I'm going to keep uploading for him because I asked you guys and you guys spoke, and I'm really glad for your support on his channel. We love you guys. I want you to know that. Well, let's get to the stories.
I'll see you guys in the dark.
So I should probably add some backstory. My father, we'll call him Wayne, worked in a machine shop across town which had its fair share of characters there. One of these people, we'll call him something different for the story, was James. Now, James was one of those guys that would seem normal at first, but had one hell of a temper. One minute you'll be eating lunch, and the next, he would be trying to fight you over the smallest things. So while my father was at work, James had come in absolutely drunk, which many of the guys had done before, but James could barely function, let alone operate a mill. My father pulled him aside and told him that he needs to leave, that him coming in drunk could possibly get him or someone else hurt, which led to him getting pissed and trying to fight my father. Now, James isn't a small guy. He's 6 foot and on the larger side, while my father was only 5'6". James had grabbed a metal pole and was swinging it around trying to hit my father. Thankfully, he didn't hit him, but tore the hell out of the door before being restrained by the other workers, and was kicked out and being fired. My father ended up leaving work early and made his way to a friend's place to have a beer and calm his nerves. Later on in the day, 8-year-old me is home alone, as my mother was at the store getting groceries. I was playing Halo 3 at the time, before hearing a knock at my door. I walked up to the door and see James through the window. Although I didn't know him well, as I've only met him once, I knew him well enough to know he wasn't a stranger, so I had to open the door. "Is your father home?" he said in the nicest tone he could muster, his breath smelling of alcohol. I said no, but somehow my 8-year-old self knew well enough not to say I was home alone. "My mom is in the shower." That was an absolute lie. Her truck wasn't even in the driveway, and it was obvious I was home alone. He had nodded and walked away from the door a little before I closed it, promptly locking it before going back to my game. A few minutes pass, and my mother arrives home with a few groceries. Once they were brought inside, we had heard a bang at the door, and then another. This was not like a knock. Someone was banging on our door trying to get in. My mother had looked through the window before grabbing me and the phone and running to the bedroom closet, which had a lock. I had no clue what was going on, but I knew it wasn't good. She had called 911 and said that there was a crazed man trying to break in, all while the sound of the banging could be heard in the background. For what seemed like hours, we waited in that closet, still hearing the loud bangs, as he had started charging into the door with his shoulder, screaming like a maniac. After about 15 minutes, we heard the familiar sounds of the police sirens as we heard the confrontation outside. It didn't take long for them to arrest the man. My mother stayed on the line with 911 until we finally walked out, seeing James in cuffs in the back of the patrol car. My father had rushed home and hugged us both. James was staring at us with bloodlust in his eyes. Although it wasn't confirmed, I had a good feeling that he was after my dad, wanting to finish the job and beating him and killing him. He had seen my mother's truck, thinking it was my father as he drove it to work every now and then. To the man who tried to break into our home, to the man who tried to kill my father, I hope we never meet again. It was probably around 5 p.m. and already dark outside when this happened. My parents just went to the airport to pick up my aunt, so they would be away for a bit. My sister and I, both 17 at the time, were both in our rooms. My sister took a nap while I was just listening to some music with my headphones on. Probably around 10 minutes after my parents left, I noticed the light of the next room next to mine turn on, and I also heard some pretty loud voices, but I naturally assumed it was just my parents coming back because they forgot something. So I didn't pay any further attention to it and just continued being on my phone while someone opened the door to my room holding a flashlight and still assumed that it was just my mom. I still somehow didn't mind and just kept focusing on my phone. Shortly after that, the door closed again and I heard 2 or 3 loud voices. And at this point, I was a bit confused because it was clearly male voices. I still continued to listen to my music when I finally realized how strange this whole situation was, and it kinda hit me that something was very off. So I got up and I went to my sister and I asked her if she knew what was going on. And she told me that she woke up to extremely loud banging on the door. That kept going for about 10 minutes. But for some strange reason, she also didn't pay any further attention to it, or the steps going up and down the stairs of the voices. So we both kind of panicked at this point and called our parents to make sure it wasn't them. And yeah, my parents were extremely confused because they were still on their way to the airport. My sister and I immediately called the police and went downstairs where we saw a giant hole in our front door. The entire door lock was completely missing, and since it was raining, there were footprints everywhere. So yeah, luckily, only some of my mother's jewelry was taken. And I know that my sister and my behavior seem extremely unlikely and strange, but I actually believe we were extremely lucky that we acted the way we did because none of us got hurt. I don't even want to imagine what could have happened if just one of us had just walked in on the 2 or 3 men in our house, or I just started screaming at the man with a flashlight. So I'm actually very grateful for whatever was going on with us that day. Who knows if they were armed or not. To the men who broke into our house, let's not meet again. So a couple of months ago, my family and I of 4, plus 2 dogs, moved house from living in a village to living in a small old farmhouse. The new house is about a 10-minute drive from the nearest town, so it's not too far, but it's one of 2 houses in the area. The other house's occupants were in the process of moving out, so they were rarely home, with hardly anything surrounding it apart from fields, one tucked away house, and one road connecting us to the town. A few days after officially moving there and unpacking most of our stuff, my parents had to go out to work. Their jobs usually mean that on weekdays, I'll have to wait until they finish work for them to pick me up and drive me home. On weekends, this means I usually stay home unbothered until around evening when my parents get home or my brother wakes up. He usually sleeps for about 16 hours at a time due to his crowded schedule or something. On this particular weekend, my parents decided that after work, they were going to visit a friend's house on the other side of the area. My brother was home, but he was determined to stay asleep and told me not to bother him under any circumstances. So basically, I had the house to myself for the whole day, with no jobs or work to do, apart from, walk the dogs and stuff. Anyway, so around 6 in the afternoon, it was already getting dark outside. Not so dark that you couldn't see anything, but dark enough that anything that you could see was basically just a silhouette with vague features. I was watching YouTube in my room upstairs when I saw the headlights of a car slowly making their way down the very long road towards our house. My first thought that it was something wrong, But then I realized the car was probably for one of the other houses next to ours, whose occupants were just moving out to come collect their stuff or something. Due to me not thinking much of the car, I just continued watching YouTube. Not even 2 minutes later, I hear my youngest dog sounding off downstairs. I instantly got the worst vibe I've ever felt in a long time, so I decided the best course of action would be to go downstairs and investigate what was causing my dog to bark. Since no one had been downstairs since the morning, all the lights were turned off, and it was dark apart from a few lamps in the living room. When I got downstairs, I looked to see where the dog was barking. Out the window. My dog had stopped barking as much since I was there now, but just to make sure everything was fine, I looked out the window to see what the cause of his distress was. When I opened the curtains enough so I could get a clear look out the window, I saw a car still running, sitting in front of my garden. It took me a quick second in the dark to also notice that the front gate to my garden was also open. My garden is surrounded by a low stone wall with a wooden fence on a latch. I then realized that a man I had never seen before was standing just beyond the open gate, surveying the house, looking through the upstairs windows, presumably for human activity. I stared in bewilderment at this person for what felt like a really long moment before he turned and looked into the window I was staring out of. We locked eyes for about 3 seconds. He looked just as shocked as I was. Moments later, he started running towards the car, and in my shock, I didn't know what to do but run upstairs and get my brother. And by then, the dogs had made enough noise to wake my brother up, so I ran into his room and frantically yelled at him to come downstairs and look. By the time I managed to get him down the stairs, the car had turned around and was just pulling away. The road outside my house leads to a dead end, and it's really hard to turn around as there isn't much space. It usually takes a minute. We saw the car speed off down the driveway, and we just stood there in shock for a while before either of us spoke. We decided I should call our parents and tell them to come home and explain what happened. After around another hour, both my parents were home, and neither one of them believed me, brushing it off as probably just someone lost, and told me that there was no need to call the police, so I felt really dumb for a while. Fast forward about 3 days. I was in school talking to my friends, and I found out that the exact same night that this had occurred, there was a string of serial robberies around the area. Mainly isolated farmhouses were hit. Since then, I've started locking the front door, even in the daytime, and I have a panic every time my dog starts barking or I see a car coming towards the house. My parents divorced when I was in the 8th grade, and after my dad moved out, my mom was very single and ready to mingle, so she often left me home alone. I would usually have someone stay the night on nights I knew my mom wasn't coming home, so I wasn't totally alone. So one night, my friend and I, who we'll call Jesse for this story, was staying the night, and for some reason, we had the best internet connection in the garage. So we were in there messing around on MySpace and such, when we started hearing what sounded like 2 people talking. Jesse and I stopped talking, and we were trying to hear what the people were saying. We got up and stood by the garage door, but we still couldn't make it out. So we went inside and looked through the peephole on my front door. There were 2 men standing in my driveway by my garage, looking around. I immediately freaked out because they weren't standing on the sidewalk or anything. They were standing by my garage like they lived at my house. I stood there watching them for a minute, before one of them started walking up to the door. I quickly but very quietly checked to make sure both locks were locked, and then looked back out the peephole. The man was leaning over the side railing of the porch, trying to look into my mom's bedroom window. I instantly signaled to Jesse to get the knives and be super quiet. I looked back outside, and the 2 men were back by the garage talking. Jessie asked what happened, and I just told her to go make sure the doors were locked while I kept watch. She came back quickly, and we switched. She kept watch while I looked for our house phone. This was before the norm was for young teens to have cell phones. All of a sudden she says, "They're leaving." My heart sank because something in my gut just told me they weren't. Without even thinking, I asked her, "Did you lock the side door in the garage?" And she said she didn't. I took off through the kitchen into the garage just as I heard our side gate open. I made it to the door and locked the deadbolt before I could get the doorknob lock, and as soon as I flipped the lock, the doorknob twisted. I thought I was going to puke. I grabbed the handle and locked it before running back inside and locking the garage door. I ran to the back door, and at that point just started yelling, "Lock the windows!" My back door had these sheer curtains over them where you were still able to see inside and outside, and before I was able to make it to the locked door, I saw someone walk up the back porch. I jumped behind the couch and watched as he tried to open the back door before the second guy followed. Jessie came walking into the living room, and I grabbed her and just pulled her behind the couch with me. We both sat there in silence, terrified, watching these two guys trying to figure out how to get in. I started to cry, and Jessie was just sitting there shaking. After what seemed like forever, they walked off to the back porch and into the backyard. We heard them banging around before we saw them walk back by the porch and out the side gate. I ran to the front and looked through the peephole again and saw them walk across the street and get into a car. I told Jessie that they were gone, and we both burst into tears and just started hugging each other. We called her aunt, and she came and picked us up and took us to her house where we stayed the night there. We never told anyone because we thought we would be in trouble for some reason. But after that, I didn't stay home alone for years, and even at 25, I still get scared when it's just my daughter and I home alone while my husband is at work, or the rare occasion where he goes out with friends. We're lucky it didn't end worse than it did, but I'm still scared from it 12 years later. So men who tried to break into my house, and who knows what else, let's not meet.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.